I'm doing 85 things at once at the moment, but I will be right back with you. We still have 5 people to get in on the Zoom panel.
So Skip needs to mute everything.
I think the time has come for the arts and Dr. Jung to get together.
I agree with
Yes,
that.
Indeed.
All right. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just admitting a few other people. I think I've gotten everybody. All right. So thank you. I know you're all wondering why I invited you here, and it's because of Coeleen Kiebert, who is outstanding sculptress in Santa Cruz, California. And Coeleen and I have been friends for 4 years now, since the last time we were in the middle of a presidential election campaign. And it's been quite nice, actually, to have this friendship over time. And I'm going to defer to my partner in this effort, Tim Holmes, who's also an internationally renowned sculptor, to lead this discussion. And so Tim, carried away. And by the way, tell people what it is we're doing here, because I don't think everyone is on our list, and the link to get on our list is on the chat right now. So
Sure. Well, first of all, Coeleen, I'm incredibly impressed that you have such a great fan following. I think it's pretty amazing. It's not very often we have this many people in this presentation. So that speaks, I think, to you and your work. And I think we're all really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Skip and I sort of started this at the beginning of the COVID crisis, partly because we realize that there's people all over the world that are dealing with exactly the same problem. This might be the first time in history that's ever taken place, where people all across the world are stuck at home. We're figuring out that we can really only have community online, except for very limited circumstances. And it creates a great deal of stress, I believe. There is not a one of us, even if we have not lost somebody who's important to us, there's not a one of us who has not lost something in terms of just the normality of life, being able to carry on like we have before. And as an artist living in Northwest U.S. in the rural part of Montana, I'm in the capital city, but it's still pretty rural. I've been sequestered for a long time, so it affects me a lot less than it does a lot of people. But there is not a one of us who is not in some way traumatized by this whole event. And it's exacerbated, unfortunately, by all these other factors, being the effects of climate change and the demise of democracy around the world. And I think all of these crises pile on top of each other. And in my own personal life, I'm dealing with a family health issue that has been really traumatizing as well. And so probably all of us have extra things that are not only shared with the rest of the community, but are particularly disagreeable in our own lives. So Skip and I wanted to create this format where people could come together as a community and kind of support each other, because we know that there's a lot of pressure on the professional psychological world, the industry of counselors and therapists that help people out. And so it just felt to us like we needed to have a way to get together and talk about our hopes and our fears in this particularly volatile time in the world.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I was able to study your work to some degree, and I'm very impressed with especially the personal journey that you have taken in unfolding your work. So maybe you can start by just giving us a little bit of background on yourself and your career.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you for acknowledging the reality that we're all living with right now. Um, and I think that there's a sense that there's so much going on, but that we're separated from it. You know, what can I do? Or because we're in lockdown to one degree or another, how can I feel like I'm a part of it, or how can I be in touch with it? And then we have Participation Mystique, and that's going to come along in this kind of a conversation. So I thank you for putting these colloquia together, because I've very much enjoyed them. And I know that there's a certain amount of effort and trouble that you go through to hook us up together. So thank you. Thank you for your effort. Wonderful. Well, how did I get to this place? My first degree is in art and art education from the University of Minnesota. And then I taught art and practiced as an artist, and married and had 4 children, and I had quite a juggling act going. And that created a lot of psychological stress, particularly as I'm building a career as an artist. And my career as an artist was in the first sense when Jung refers to 2 kinds of art. I was doing objective art, so to speak, even though I sensed it was coming from my unconscious. And when I realized that, and I looked back after psychological trauma and therapy, looked back at the work that I had been doing all of those years, I could see that my unconscious was telling another story. And I wanted to know what that story was, and what did it mean even that that was happening, and what is this process that we as artists go through when we're creating, and who are these people that are creative people? Are they really nuts? Do they really have to go through angst and terror and trauma in order to do their art? Is this the state of it? So those questions came rushing in, hot and heavy actually, and that led me to go back to graduate school at the University of Minnesota, but I had a hard time finding an ear that could understand these things. For one thing, Carl Jung's name was verboten, and it might still be even, although there's a very strong Jung Institute in Minneapolis, so I should acknowledge that. But in pursuing the psychology of it, I ended up coming to the University of California, Santa Cruz, and meeting Frank, because of meeting Frank Buren. And I'm going to describe Frank Buren a little later, but that tells you a bit about me. And I'm here still in Santa Cruz. I have a wonderful collection of people that work with me, students, but they're really friends, colleagues, and we're all on this path together of pursuing knowledge and information and wisdom from the collective unconscious. It's not a mystical thing. It's a real thing. So, and I wanted to say something about the invitation that you sent out. I noticed that you corrected it, but by calling me a sculptor now, probably Tim, you might have had something to do with that. But for the first couple of weeks that it went out, it called me a sculptor, Coeleen Kiebert. And actually, I think that's true, that's what happens in Participation Mystique. I think that I'm the sculptor who is choosing what it is that I want to create, but actually the mystique, the collective unconscious, is choosing me and making me. So I am actually a sculpture. So either way you leave it, I can go with it. It just makes a lot of sense.
My English professors would just turned over in their grave.
Yeah. Well, they can take another look now. It's okay. I want to start out with a particular image. This is an image of the Sistine Chapel. And perhaps some of you have been there. I have not myself, but my son was, and my friend Kathleen Doodles are helping me with this part of it. Here's an image of the Sistine Chapel. And you can see that here at the bottom, we have God giving life to Adam. And then we move up to the Garden of Eden. And here we have Lilith, something going on in the Garden of Eden. And we've blown it up here. This is so important. So this painting was painted by Michelangelo in about 1510, 1511 or so, they guess. And it's the story of Adam and Eve and Lilith. But it's a story that has been repressed in our Western civilization. It's been repressed in the Judeo-Western civilization. In reading up on Lilith, she is told about in the Book of Solomon that there are other places in the Old Testament, but even that's been set aside. So here's the story that's so important. Lilith is Adam's first wife, and she gets tired of being bossed around by Adam. So she calls God and she says, I'm tired of being bossed around by Adam. I don't think I should have to follow his orders. And why is this? And God said, well, because that's the way I set it up. And she said, well, I made her the same thing. I'm equal. So I think that I have just as much right to tell him what to do as he has to tell me. And God says, that's not the way it is. You're going to have to obey Adam. Well, she says, I am out of here if that's the deal. And she's cast out after, but she leaves. And after a while, Adam gets lonely and he complains to God about his loneliness. And so he says, well, I'll make you another woman, but you're going to have to give me your rib. So he makes Eve, properly named Eve. He makes Eve. So in the meantime, Lilith has been out having a wonderful time. She's grown up, she's become adult, really, and she's traveled a lot, and she's had a lot of men in her life, and she's had a lot of children, and she's having a great time. And God finds out about this, and he's so infuriated that he kills all of her children. Well, she's horrified and says, how am I going to get back to even with God? And so she goes back, figures out, how am I going to get back into the Garden of Eden and get even with God? I'll get even with him by taking the apple from the tree of knowledge, which we were told never to taste. And I'm going to give that apple to Eve. But how will I get back into the garden? So she turns herself into a serpent so as not to be noticed. And she's back in the garden. And what we see is this moment where her body is woven around the tree and she's handing out the apple to Adam and Eve. Now, what's important about this today, 500 years later, is that these are archetypes that Carl Jung is talking about that rest in the unconscious. The archetype of Adam, who's handsome, beautifully built, but a little thick-headed. We've got Eve, she's very beautiful, but naive. Um, then we have Lilith, who is evil personified. She is the bad girl. She is the one that causes all of the trouble. She's the one that speaks out. She's our Nancy Pelosi, our AOC, our Ruth Bader, excuse me, Ginsburg. These women have embodied Lilith. Not that they didn't have a strong Eve to begin with, but just to make the point that this archetype is so powerful that we're still dealing with the trouble of Lilith. So enter Carl Jung. A book that I've been very taken with is by Joe Vandenberg. Tim, are you familiar with this book yet?
No, I'm not.
Well, I'll send you a copy. I want you to have a copy.
Oh, that's great.
Jung on Art, the Autonomy of the Creative Drive. It's so informative. This was written in 2009. It was translated into English in 2012. Vandenberg is a Jungian analyst in Amsterdam, and he was head of the Jung Association in Amsterdam for up until the last director. As a matter of fact, recently he's been the director of the Jung Association.
Hey, Coeleen,
It's
before you
wonderful.
carry on, can I just ask you, can you share with us the source of the Lilith story?
It's in the Book of Solomon, and it's also been told to be by Mary Holmes. Some of you may know Mary Holmes, but she's not to be questioned. She was a professor emeritus from U.C. Santa Cruz. Yeah, here's Mary. I keep her nearby at all times. But that would be the best way.
Susan Scott and Susan Schwartz, who sometimes are on these panels, also wrote a book about Lilith.
Good. And Jung actually asked that someone write a book about Lilith. And I do have a copy of it. Perhaps by the end of the session today, I can give you information about that too. What's interesting is the repression and the bad rap that she's getting, that hasn't changed very much, except now we're beginning to see it in real time. So here's a description of the Participation Mystique, or a reference to it in Vandenberg's book. The human person is merely the blossom and fruit of one season, sprung from centuries-old system of roots, of which he is an intrinsic part by means of participation mystique. He goes on to say how this, the artist in particular knows how to descend into these roots and to excavate the prima materia from the underworld like a true alchemist, and to transform it into a work of art. Those of you that have worked in this studio know exactly what that means. He does this in two ways. Either he enchants this prima materia in abstract forms, or he is inebriated by it in organic forms. According to Jung, both motives are present in each work of art. The artist descends into the primeval chaos, but he is not allowed to drown in it. That's what's so important. We mustn't become so fascinated with what is in the mystique that we don't come out with some knowledge and even self-knowledge, something that we integrate into our being. So Carl Jung, the gifts that Carl Jung gave to us, I want to identify how those have affected the artist. So the awareness that the collective unconscious, that the unconscious is a collective. And of course, this was the issue over which he and Freud broke ranks. Freud couldn't believe that Jung was really serious about the fact that there would be an unconscious that would be anything other than our repressions, our terrors, our fears, our personal hang-ups, especially around sexuality. Everything was described in that way. So that means that the artist can only be expressing from an angst and only from a personal place. So if this difficulty that is coming up is about only the artist, then that's a hard self-image to buy. But up until the time that Jung opened this thinking up to a collective unconscious, that there are two levels. There's a personal unconscious, and then there is the collective unconscious in which lives the mystique. So that's the first gift. The second gift is this autonomy of the creative drive. That is a separate drive. It might brush up against our sexual drive, but it's not. It is autonomous. Again, I'm going to read from Vandenberg. So art. This is Vandenberg. Art is the result of an autonomous complex. It comes to light from the unconscious instinctive depths. Quote, now we have Jung speaking. Art is a kind of innate drive that seizes a human being and makes him its instrument. The artist is not a person endowed with free will who seeks his own ends, but one who allows art to realize its purposes through him. So that can be a shake to any artist's super ego, if you digest that. But it's been very interesting for me to look at it that way. That's how I might accidentally be called a sculptor. So the third gift, the first collective unconscious, the autonomy of the creative drive. The third gift is individuation. How do we get there? And so the first stage, we are born into a numinous state, a very precious state of being. My teacher, Baba Haridas, said that in the first 21 days of birth, an infant should only be exposed to their parents because the balm, the beauty, the numinous character that the infant is in should be protected as long as possible. But then we come out of that naturally and we begin to sense that I exist and mother exists and father exists and the world exists and my toys do, and who am I going to be? And we work our way into the third stage, which is the persona. I loved the way Maurice Stein described this whole individuation process, by the way, Skip, when you had him a few weeks ago. The persona can work, and in many cases, most people just stop there. They get, if they make enough money, if their career is successful enough, if their family is holding together, why will look for anything else? Except that Jung says that usually about halfway through life or 2/3 of the way through life, maybe it'll take that long, something will happen to counteract what it is that we put together so carefully. It might be in the form of a health crisis, or it might be in the form of our company falling apart, or our persona falling apart, or our marriage falling apart. We begin to ask questions. How could this happen? I thought I was doing the right thing. And so we enter into the fourth phase, which is when we ask questions. What is it all about? And in this stage, we will make some choices, because some people may say, well, that's all very interesting. I think I'll put the persona back as best I can. Or I think that I'll make a serious change in my life and see what I can find out about going into this final phase of individuation. And in the final phase, what we do is go back through our life, look at our life, what it is it that we've done and not done, and gather up the experience of pneumanosa that we had as an infant, only come back out of it with an awareness, come back out of it with knowledge. That's what he means by not becoming inebriated by it, but coming back with knowledge, with self-knowledge, with an understanding of who I am in this great mystery. So that's the individuation. And then out of that, next and finally, is this concept of the participation mystique, much of which I've already said a lot about. So that lays the groundwork for how I see Jung's contributions have changed our perception of the artist. The artist is someone that goes into the mystique for information and is affected by that and is true to that, but individuates, says, what does it mean to me? That's the process and how it is for the artist. And now it should be for everyone, not just the artist, of course. We're using the artist as an example, but times have changed. And so let me carry on to other contributors. I think the big time that changed was Maslow, Abraham Maslow, when he started talking about self-actualization. And he came up with his hierarchy of needs, which are very much like Jung's individuation process. At the same time, Erik Erikson came up with his 8 stages of the development of man. So these ideas that we can progress along begin to be taken on by psychologists that have followed Dr. Jung. Abraham Maslow talked about self-actualization, how we go through the process of self-actualization, which is individuation. And he talked about peak experiences. So from Maslow's point of view, the peak experience is the same as Jung's numinous experience, in which we find ourselves outside of ourselves. I'm picking up an echo. Is anybody else? Okay, I'll just carry on.
Yeah, go ahead. We just have a problem with somebody's mic here.
Okay. And I think the last point about Maslow, which ties in with my teacher, Frank Barron. Frank worked with Maslow, and he was at one of those early meetings in San Francisco when Carl Rogers, they all came together.
Just a minute, Coeleen. Robert Sward, would you please mute your mic, because you're giving us feedback out of your mic needs to be muted, sir.
Needs to be what?
Muted. Okay, it is muted now.
Okay.
No, it keeps coming off mute though. All right, it needs to stay muted. Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, go ahead.
So at this meeting that I was describing with all the big buffaloes, Maslow said, this is the beginning of something big, and I am going to call it the human potential movement. And that's become, I guess, like an icon in our culture now. We all accept that. And we've all been a part of it one way or another. So I met Frank Barron while I was still living in Minnesota, but on a visit here, where I was seriously thinking about moving to San Diego and finally had a position there, I called my dear friend Janie Ryan, who was a Gestalt art therapist, who had helped me come to terms with a lot of things with my art, and said, I think that I could make it in San Diego with my 4 children, but just doesn't feel right. And she said, I'm so glad you called. You really must meet Frank Barron. Actually, I had met him just briefly, but he wants you to come back and talk. He thinks you should be coming here to study. And so that led to my bringing my 4 children out to Santa Cruz. And here we still are today. So Frank, why was he so interesting to study with? Well, for one thing, he was one of the 4 at Harvard that wanted to do the LSD experiments with John Lilly and Richard Allport, who became Ramdas. They were invited to leave. That was not a welcome idea. And so Frank went to the University of Berkeley. And there with Stan Grof, he continued to study the LSD experiments while it was still legal. It became legal, and Stan Grof took that into his breathing practice and is still doing elegant work. Frank took it into the study of the creative personality. Actually, this whole shift, and we have to give Maslow credit again, he said, why are we only studying sick people? Why don't we start to study healthy people? What is it that goes into making a healthy person? And this is what Frank picked up on. Maslow, unfortunately, died an early death. I think he was only about 60 years old when he died. But Frank carried on the work. And he came up with a couple of things about artists, creative people. Frank had a significant input in the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. He also taught at the University of Minnesota with I can't think of his name right now, it doesn't matter. At the time, he said the MMPI is really good at defining a diagnosis, but we don't have a way of knowing who is a good candidate for therapy. And so he came up with the ego strength scale. And that, to this day, is a very important scale in determining how successful we might expect a client to be in therapy. Then he started studying the creative people, and he found that the creative women on the MMPI score higher than the average woman on masculinity scales. Now we might say, well, yes, let's look at the abstract expressionists. Those women had a pretty strong masculine going, but they also score higher on femininity scales than the average woman, but their feminine is stronger. Then he looked at the creative males, and he found the same thing, that the creative males have stronger masculinity scales than the average male. Just take a look at Jackson Pollock. Or they also have stronger femininity scales, which enables them to enter into the mystique. And then he learned that they also had strong ego strength. He studied the one last study. He noticed that the creative people, particularly students, graduate students in the art department at UC Berkeley, on the MMPI, were scoring as schizophrenic. In fact, they were as schizophrenic as the schizophrenics that were locked up. So what was the difference between the two? And of course, the difference is ego strength. That the suffering schizophrenic finds themselves in the mystique and doesn't understand that there's any other reality but that. They can't leave the mystique at will. When they come out of it, they don't know that they were at another place. It's a new reality. So for those of us, the rest of the, 95% of the population, we can engage with the mystique and know that we're doing that. And if somebody hollers fire, fire, we can put down the paintbrush and leave. We can change our reality and we can know where we were and where we're going. I found that to be, that study to be a great relief, not only to me, but to most of my students. They take a deep breath when they hear that one. Oh, that's what I do. That's what I do. I go into another reality. I bring a teaching out of that and I integrate it into myself besides, which is individuation and self-actualization. So there's a willingness to engage with the participation mystique. Now back to Carl Jung. He said there are two kinds of art. There's, let me put you in analysis. Oh, good. All right, let's, this is a painting by Mary Alice Cobb, dear friend, a very professional painter who has devoted her career to painting, to her art process. This would be considered objective art. We know what this is. If any of you have been to China Cove at down in Carmel, you might recognize this what is the name of the
Point
rock?
Reyes.
What?
Point Reyes.
Oh, Point Reyes. Yes. Okay. At Point Reyes. So anyway, I love this painting. It's a very large painting. It's about 3.5 feet by 4 feet, 4.5 feet. And I have it hanging in my living room and I just love it. This is an objective painting. Now, Mary Alice has been struck with Lyme disease. She's in an advanced stage of Lyme disease, and it's all she can do to hold her body together, keep it upright, and get from one side of the room to the other on her own. So let's just take a look first before I show you what she's doing now. And see how these different planes are fitting in together. This is what Mary Alice does when she's painting. She puts these different planes together in such a way that you recognize the subject matter. But now she's gone into abstract work and she's doing the second kind of art that Jung refers to, which is abstract. So now, can you see these same planes working together, trying to find their balance? How are they going to connect to each other? Where are they going to connect? And Mary Alice spends hours getting this color to be exactly right with that color. And when you're in front of this painting, you believe that you could reach out and touch these triangles that are coming towards you. They're planes. There's an optical illusion going on. You would swear that this is behind this when you see it. Let me show you another example. So these are like the rocks in the painting that I just showed you. Look at this coming down the side of that ravine. And that piece of water, the break in the rock in that piece of water. So I wanted to bring in a teaching. You can see here to how close she works for hours to get those colors. Look at the transparency here and the transparency there. To be able to get that to be transparent is very tricky, very difficult. She works it until it is just right. She finds the right pattern, which is resting in her unconscious. Another way that I'd like for you to look at this too is having gone to China and working with the Chinese teachers there, we look at a painting in a very different way than they do. We look at a painting and we say, I like it, or I don't like it. I get it or I don't get it. I'm entertained by it or I'm not. A Chinese would never make that judgment about the painting. The Chinese would say, what is the experience that the artist is having when she moves this green to that green, and then that green to that green? What is the experience the artist is having when she moves from this plane to that plane, to that plane, to that plane? Look at this reflection that's going on here. What is the experience the artist is having when she's able to create that reflection or that sense of the painting moving towards you? So I think that this is a very good example of participation with the mystique. I also want to read a poem to you from Robert Sword, our friend who was having difficulty with his mute button. Robert is a poet emeritus, and he was a poet laureate for Santa Cruz for a couple of years just recently. This is his latest book, All That I Have Not Made, and it's I'm proud to have my own sculpture on the front of it. All That I Have Not Made. I'm going to read that poem to you because I think it so well illustrates the experience of engaging with the mystique. All for a day. All day I have written words. My subject has been that, words. And I am wrong. And the words I burn. 3 pages of them, words. And the moon, moonlight, that too, I burn. A poem remains. But in the words, in the fire that is now words, I eat the words that remain and am eaten by nothing, by all that I have not made. It goes on and on, the mystique. I'd like to show you an example of my experience with the mystique at the time of the 2016 election, which isn't very far from right now. Oh, my brush. Okay.
It's wonderful to see a little bit of your studio.
So at the time of the 2016 election, I, like most everybody else, I thought I knew the outcome, what the outcome was going to be. And I was stunned when Hillary did not win. Just stunned. I came to a halt. And I had that feeling of, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? How am I going to handle this? And I couldn't get any further than that. So I sculpted myself stuck in that position. What am I going to do? What is happening here? And a snake appeared around my chair and my leg. This is a piece that I've grown to like so well that I've had it cast in bronze here. This, what am I going to do? What are we going to do about the pandemic? What are we going to do about the planet? What are we going to do about what's happening in our democracy? Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to say that that Mary Alice feels like this is what's happening to the country too. This shift that's going on. And so it's an example of it being part of the collective as well as the personal. So this is the personal and the collective going on. The next piece that happened after what am I going to do is this piece. And I did pieces of women in the Garden of Eden. And they're saying, what's going on? Something has happened to our garden. There are snakes in this garden. What is going on in the garden? Something is rotten. um, and it is being held, the garden is being held by the hand of God. So I thought maybe as long as this is going to happen, the masculine is so strong right now. Maybe if the feminine can get strong, maybe we can offer up our feminine and get a balance going here. And so this is me offering up an apple, hoping that maybe somebody in the legislature, maybe somebody in the White House will take a bite of the apple. I want to point out the ruffle that I put on her hands also, because that's my Ruth Bader Ginsburg collar. It's the have no fear, don't worry about this apple. I mean well, but nothing seemed to happen. It didn't work very well, and so I did her again. I thought, well, maybe a little more makeup, a little more ruffle, that I can get their attention with the feminine, but it still felt like something that was not being recognized, not being seen. After a while, I began to get discouraged. And I did this, Eve's Lament. What's happening here? Things seem to be getting worse and worse. And so we have Eve's Lament. About that time, the Kavanaugh hearings took place, and I had such feeling for Dr. Ford and her struggle. So this is Dr. Ford struggling with evil, with darkness over the apple. Who's going to get the apple? And a couple of days ago, somebody asked me, Louisa asked me, why does she have a metal arm? That's her amulet. That's her weapon. That's what she needs in order to be able to withstand what she went through. Following that, I was really discouraged, and I did reluctance. No longer willing to give the apple away anymore. Lots of apples, lots of wisdom. Maybe I can turn it here.
No.
Lots of wisdom, but discouraged, and I'm not going to give them away anymore. And then this is my Lilith piece, and I call this So Many Apples, So Few Takers. And Lilith is just lounging in the wisdom, still held by the hands of God, but so much wisdom to offer and no takers. Let's stop here too, because
Good catch.
yeah, very good, Kathleen.
Oh, that was
Yes. This is a sculpture that Peggy Snyder did of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I just love this piece. And each time Ginsburg would go into the hospital, I would light a candle for her in front of Peggy's sculpture. This sculpture is by Lindsay Johnson, and I just love her Ruth Bader Ginsburg that just hasn't been glazed yet, but it's on its way. And
so
then
you're the one that
have,
has kept her healthy for so long.
Jessica, my assistant, Jessica Lee, who just sent this to me yesterday. She just did that of Ginsburg. Now, look what happens in the studio. It's a very quiet place with white tables and emptiness, but when you all come in here and you start working, this is what happens. So these are, I wanted to show you the kinds of things that come up from the unconscious, because I want you all to try to do this and to accept what it is that comes forward.
Frozen.
Coeleen, I think that you may have stepped a little bit far away from your Wi-Fi router, and because you're carrying your laptop or your iPad around, and we've got you frozen right now. Okay. I will call Coeleen on the phone right now and just see if we can get her back.
Well, what she's talking about with the process of the artist, I know that there's a lot of artists here in this group, and it seems to me that that's really a good reflection of what I feel going down into the depths and coming back with some kind of treasure.
Uh-huh.
Are we back?
Are we back?
Yeah, so looks like we are.
Oh, good, good.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I think that your work is so expressive. Tim, I looked at your website too, and I'm very impressed with your skill and the feeling that you're putting into your work.
Whoops.
Are we frozen now? No, we're okay.
I think we're all right.
Okay. So there's the dive is also something that comes up regularly in people's work of diving into the unconscious this way. I like these pieces back here of Marilyn's. They're the ones in front. She felt were very masculine. She intended for them to be. And then she asked herself, if I work in this fashion, what happens if I do the feminine? And the two pieces in the back came forth. So one gets to experience these parts of oneself. This is Leah, and makes me think of Black Lives Matter and the jewels that are coming up out of the unconscious. The Black Lives Matter movement is something that comes out of the mystique, that the situation gets so out of balance that it will burst through from the unconscious. Here this would be considered the maquette. When she takes it further, it moves. Every time you take a piece from the unconscious and you do it again, it will move. Her seed, this jewel, is being planted here. And then there's an explosion of consciousness as a result. We have Toya's shamans. She has a garden full of shamans to take care of all of us. And this is Kathleen's doodle, which is taken to a painting. And then this is a sculpture that comes as a result of it. It's another whole subject of taking something from a doodle to a drawing, where it's still two-dimensional, however. Then we bring it into third dimension. And perhaps I can comment on that in Jung's mandalas. So we also have doodles, which is what I want to encourage you to do. Here's an example of doodles. This is Ina's Amen. She takes a word and she draws the word, and then she builds her doodle around it. RBG. And AOC. And see the mandala coming up or this way. But the mandalas often come forth. Now, this is a very interesting collection. Barbara Chatan's mother-in-law was dying. And she lives just a couple blocks away, and Barbara got the word that family are coming from everywhere. This was just a couple of weeks ago, so we're in the middle of a pandemic. Barbara's the great cook. She's the great hostess. She's the one that's going to take care of everybody. This is her husband's mother, after all. So she says, how am I going to keep myself centered through all of this? And she decides to do a doodle because she's a doodle practitioner, so a daily doodler. So she does this doodle. And when I asked her about her mother, what her mother-in-law, what was she like? She said, oh, she is so sweet. Could she be the pink in your doodle? Definitely she's the pink. She's everywhere in what we are going through right now. So then people arrive. It's all happening. Her mother is dying. The pink bubbles are starting to rise up. All the people are there holding her, but her essence is rising up. And Barb does a doodle about that. You can see how full her feelings are about what's happening. And then her mother-in-law dies. No pink. And then she begins to feel her mother-in-law's spirit coming into her. And then finally, she feels at the burial, the release of her mother-in-law's spirit. I asked her if I could share these with you because I think it's such a beautiful example of how one can hold oneself through a difficult experience. Here's an example of a painting that, how do we put this? Oh, okay, these are paintings that Davina does, and trying to get to the delicacy of what it is that you can, I should get this out of the way, of what you can achieve. And it's a kind of fine tuning that Davina is doing with herself right now. A poem from Ellen Bass as well. I had a dream of a rose. You carried them to me. Clouds of glory. The blush and gold. So wanting to be able to say that. And one of the things that Jung says is that when we work objectively like this, like Davina is, we're developing empathy. That when we want to copy an object or capture an object, it is because we're so taken with it that we are empathizing with it. And then in the process of doing it this way, we're feeling that empathy for it. So it is, again, like the Chinese would say, what is the experience that Davina is having in doing this rose? How are we doing on time? We're a little over an hour. One more example here. This is Luann. She did this painting. Actually, she broke her right arm, and she's right-handed. And so she had to paint with her left. She couldn't work with clay anymore, which is what she usually does. So she started painting. She painted this painting of these 4 women and this boat. Some are in it, some are not, but there's 4 women here. This woman, this woman, this woman, this woman. And she says, well, I don't know what this is about. I don't know who these women are, but she decided to paint each one individually so that she could get a better sense. So here's one who dreams about being in a boat, is at home taking care of family, reading a book, but has a dream. Here's one that doesn't know what to do about that dream. Dreaming about it. I guess you could say this would be an example of drowning in the mystic. Then she got in touch with a little bit more fun and did this one. And she did this one. And then she did this one. So she found her way through this dilemma for now. Let's see.
So Sharon's.
No, I think that we've probably looked at enough of the art of the students. I want to look at Jung's art now and finish with that. Let's see. So where are we today? And how are the mandalas helping us? Here's an example of Jung's art. I want to point out the transparency in this piece, that his first paintings were quite objective. And with images in them, they're very two-dimensional, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. Here, they would be very, very two-dimensional. Very two-dimensional, but this one I would say, and this one begins to take on a kind of dynamic, so that, and I have not studied his text that goes with these yet, but what I do know from the doodles that people do, the drawings that people do, and then taking them into painting and then taking them into sculpture, that there is a progression of our working in a pretty two-dimensional way. Things are flat, that's where we start. But then we begin to take on a dynamic so that things are going in and out, in front and in back. And then he started to play with more perspective and even a little bit of transparency. But I find the last ones that he did particularly exciting. Here we have the two-dimension again, and more dimension happening. And then we get into something that is much more transparent, which I would say is reflecting his spiritual life. I'd like to finish with a statement from Jung out of the Red Book. That would be on page 212 in the Red Book. He says, the unconscious contains the wisdom and experience of untold ages, and thus formed an unparalleled guide. The attempt to gain the wisdom stored in the unconscious is portrayed throughout the book, in which Jung asks the soul, excuse me, this is difficult name for me to say, Shamdasani. This is Shamdasani, and then the last line is a quote from Jung. The attempt to gain the wisdom stored in the unconscious is portrayed throughout the book, in which Jung asks his soul to tell him what she sees and the meaning of his fantasies. The unconscious is here viewed as a source of higher wisdom. He concluded the essay, which he wrote in 1932, by indicating the personal and experiential nature of his new conceptions. And here is the quote from Jung. Our age is seeking a new spring of life. I found one and drank of it, and the water tasted good. Amen.
Wow.
Oh, hi, Rhea.
Oh my, Coeleen, that was wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yes, it's so wonderful to not only hear you talk about the work, but to see some other work and then to see your studio, I think it really helps me to just know the environment that you're working in. And as I said before, to me, it's very much a deep understanding of what the creative human being is about, that even those of us who don't consider ourselves artists have to be taken down into the stuff of life and are confronted with this kind of darkness and this what comes out in mythology as the dragon in the cave in the mountain.
Yeah.
And we have to come back bearing some kind of treasure. And it's a dangerous process and it takes a lot of courage. And you've done a wonderful job of it. I'm just so grateful to listen to you tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Or that feeling, you know, when you go down into it, and do you ever ask yourself, you know, what am I doing here? Why aren't I out dishing up soup? You know, what's the purpose of this? What's the meaning of it? Yeah.
So I want to encourage anyone who has questions to just go ahead and put them in the chat. And meanwhile, I've got a few that maybe I'll start with while we're seeing what other people are interested in. I went through some of the other series that you had worked through that appear on your website that you didn't talk about tonight. But one of the things that really struck me was something you said in one of the series, that you have to approach the work with a kind of tongue-in-cheek attitude. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, maybe that's part of not taking myself too seriously. That anything can happen and it's okay. That if I get too serious about what it is I want to say, you know, that's just exactly the problem. I think it's that not taking myself too seriously, and now realizing that at the same time that I'm here in the studio, there's an energy that's got something that wants to work through me. If I'm not taking myself too seriously, it can work its way up through.
That's great. It reminds me of
if I just want to comment, you know, the work that I showed you that I did in 2016, if I took that work seriously, it would look very different. You know, I mean, each one of those pieces from an aesthetic point of view could be improved upon, but that's not the idea. And so I think that's probably part of the tongue-in-cheek. It was letting it be that raw. Yeah.
We have a question from YouTube here, from one of my friends on YouTube, Mario Gutierrez, who's appeared here before, but he asked, my question for Coeleen, have you ever made a sculpture from a song or melody or joke?
Oh, that is right out of the Participation Mystique. I just finished my piece that I call It Don't Mean a Thing If You Ain't Got That Swing. Do-wop, ba-do-wop, ba-do. I got to show it to you. It's right here.
Let me sneak behind you.
Okay, so this is, I call it Swing, but it's right off of Duke Ellington's song. And it was inspired, actually, thanks so much, Kathleen. It was inspired by this little maquette I did. Now, this is a tongue-in-cheek maquette. I just loved doing her. And those of you who know my work, this is a very unusual kind of thing for me to do. But I did her. And
we have Coeleen, we have a little too much light on your sculpture, so it's hard to see it. It's sort of blasted out. Uh, that
Okay.
might help. Yeah, that would be better probably.
So I have read about Jung's using the word rhizome, that's at the bottom of everything, holds everything together, holds the planet together, holds our psyches together. And so I started to make the rhizome. Well, what's that look like? And this bottom part of this sculpture is the rhizome. But it was feeling a little tight. I did put in the apple that this comes out of the rhizome, but I got up about halfway and I thought, it just don't have that swing. And I looked at this other little piece that I had done, and what did I do with this that gave it that swing? And it's all in the skirt. And so I came back to the sculpture and I gave it all those ruffles. And of course, that's my ode to Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the same time of giving it the ruffles. And then the very top piece is that swing. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And I think that when you say a song, well, yes, that's the song. And then it's also what we got to do right now. We can't just talk about it. We got to do it. Carl Jung asked us to do it. He did it. He did the Red Book. And as Murray Stein said, we all have to do our own Red Book.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great assignment that we all should take seriously while we are not taking ourselves too seriously.
Yes.
Terry McNichol is asking, can you talk about a little bit more about having empathy for the object? Where did that come from? Was that Jung?
Yes. Actually, I believe that it's Warringer that Jung picked that up from and felt that it develops empathy. That you are looking, let's say you're doing a portrait or a portrait of a child that you care a lot about. And so you want to capture that. And that takes empathy towards that object, the feeling of empathy towards that object. I wonder, Tim, do you have that when you're doing those beautiful figures? Do you feel empathy for the women that you're doing when you're working with it?
Yes, for me, I'm a figurative sculptor, and most of my work is inspired by the human figure. And there's a great deal of empathy. In fact, sometimes I confuse the object, the sculpture with a real person. I'll be pushing on the eyeball and I'll think, oh gosh, I hope that doesn't hurt. And it seems to me that I can't really address the subject without becoming it myself. So that's very much part of my process too.
That another way that I experience that is by getting in the position of my sculpture. Because when I got in the position of that little dancer, I had to throw that hip out. I had to get into that feeling, and I realized, oh, it's all in the skirt. and then the ruffles came forth. And so that's empathy. Yeah. I hope that helps answer.
I work almost exclusively with the nude, and I find that a lot of the work I do is very, very athletic. And I'll get into the position of a piece I'm working on, and the place that hurts is where I put the energy.
Oh,
so
interesting.
So that's a great technique that I have found really helpful.
Oh, I'll bet it is. And that's empathy. Yeah.
So let me carry on with some more comments here. Diana Hobson says, I'm beginning to take all my past work apart, saving some and disposing of the remainder. There's a need to start again with a clear space to discover what is needed. This is exhilarating and painful to let go. How do you approach this new beginning?
Well, I often begin with a collage. And recently I've taken my old collages and gone through them to see what's meaningful to me right now. And then, and Diana, I'm glad to hear you're here and hear your question. I don't throw things away. I probably should, but I don't. I put them in a folder or put them away in the flat files for another day. But it's an ongoing process. There's not a beginning and an end and a beginning and an end. You know, it's so picking those images, like the rhizome images that I found to start working on it, are really quite old. They're 2, 3, 4 years old. So those old images, bringing them together and seeing what wants, what wants to come on stage now. But I just put the other ones backstage.
Huh.
Well, thank you, Coeleen.
Hi,
Hi, Coeleen. I'm finding great difficulty in letting go of certain things. And I think I take your advice there and put those aside.
Yes.
I'm stuck at the moment because there are some things that I really can't let go of. And so thank you for that.
Well, you could I know how you work with paper. You could make a very special envelope, a very special wrapping just for those things, But I go by Mary Holmes. She says, never throw anything away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because Picasso says, don't be afraid to destroy everything because the things that are really important will keep coming back to you. Like Diana just said. So maybe it's a challenge to find a balance between those two things.
I'm sure you must have had the experience when you're sculpting, Tim. There's times when I'm sculpting and there's something that I like very much, something that happened that I really like, but in order to move on, I have to give it up.
Yes.
I have to give it up in order to keep going. And yeah, but that's in order to keep going. And I suppose that's not getting inebriated in the process.
Yes. Well, Bill Roberts is with us. He says he's a photographer and he finds empathy essential to capturing images of people. Do you want to say something about that, Bill?
Please do, Bill. Hi, Bill. Hi.
Hi, Coeleen. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I've been thinking about the empathy thing since I really hadn't thought about it very much, but I've been on a 20-year journey with photography, and much of it is street photography or photography of people in various rituals, religious rituals or whatnot. I think getting inside the empathy for me is kind of trying to feel what they're feeling, experiencing what they're experiencing, not judging what they're doing or saying or experiencing, and then capturing the images. So I would go so far as to say great street photography, by which I mean, walking around the street and taking photos of people in candid situations, not, in a studio. Although I'm sure empathy is important in a studio. I've never worked in a studio. But I would say the greatest street photography is probably from the most empathic photographers.
I'm just looking at your book on Omoto.
Yeah. Well, it's all people.
Yes. And how you have to do that.
Down a little bit.
Down a little, yeah. The feeling that's going on at that time.
But I really hadn't thought about it that much, only just vaguely. I really hadn't thought about it all that much until you started talking about the empathy aspect. So thank you for that today, because it put a defining concept on sort of what I've been on, for the path I've been on for 20 years.
Well, look at this, the feeling you must have had when you were there.
Well, that's landscape. And I would say that, I would say empathy is a key to that as well. But especially true with people, photos of people on streets, in action, doing things, whatever.
Yeah. What's going on here, Bill?
Down a little bit.
Down.
Oh, that's they're making mochi. Mochi is pounded rice, and then they make mochi cakes. This is in Japan. And yeah, let's call it mochi, M-O-C-H-I.
Ah.
They make it at December. It's a New Year's kind of activity. Then they'll stuff it with sweet jams and stuff, or plums, and then make balls out of them and eat them.
Bill and I were both at Omoto in Japan. There might be some people in the audience that have been to Omoto. The attraction there is that they believe that art is the spiritual practice, that's where it comes from. That's what it's all about. And so their religious practice is calligraphy, tea ceremony.
No drama.
No drama, right.
And the martial arts as well.
And Aikido, yeah. It's wonderful. I was able to go to their school many years ago and learned so much. And they talk about, I think they talk about bumping into yourself in the studio, that they'll move from one art form to another, that they might get really good at no dance, but then if they get too slick, they'll no longer bump into themselves in the studio. So it's time to take up flower arranging. That you always take on a new art form every few years, because the purpose is for self-development.
Wow, that's a cool concept. I like that a lot. Thanks for showing me that.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for showing Bill's work. It's fun to see.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Jordan Hoggard has a comment. He says, wonderfully direct depth of presentation. Thank you. I thoroughly appreciate you bringing the Lilith strata into the Garden of Eden story, as well as into your own sculpture of your own recent sculpture. It very much informs the French surrealist poet Paul Valéry, his 16-page poem, The Sketch of a Serpent, translated into English by Dr. Lynn Hoggard. Its premise is not shame or guilt in the fall of Adam and Eve, but instead the birth of consciousness in Eve's decision to bite the apple. And in so doing, biting the apple, she consummated the second birth of consciousness, of which Lilith had already authored. I don't currently have a question, simply wanted to express my thanks for the resonant chords you struck here today that cascade through my work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I want to show, on that note, I want to show you this painting. Is it well positioned? This is by Yuri Klepa.
Back a little tiny bit.
And it was it's a contemporary piece. And this is Lilith. And she's offering the apple to Eve. And Eve has her mouth open. And the apple is levitating. And Lilith is still in her serpent. She's still in her serpent gown. And I see that she's gained wings of a sort. But I think what's so exciting is that this is in contemporary Ukraine. This comes from Ukraine. Oh, isn't that wonderful? It's still there now. Yeah, I hope, Tim, I hope you'll be inspired to do a Lilith.
Yes, that powerful feminine energy is really a big part of my work. I have this big, huge, beautiful studio in Helena, Montana that was built in 1890 as a home for wayward women. And a lot of that kind of angsty feminine energy is still in this building. So I work with that quite a bit.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Wayward women.
So one of the series that I was really intrigued with was your series on justice. And you didn't mention this, but you talked in your introduction there about the death of your son.
Yes.
And what you were looking for is not justice, but truth about your son's death.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could just elaborate, like one of the things that I was really aware of in looking at these sculptures was how justice is always blind. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit?
Yes. Well, she's blind so as to be impartial. But that series, at the time of David's death was the same thing. I must do something. David died under mysterious circumstances. And so I was trying to seek justice. For the first couple of years, I worked very hard with detectives, magistrates in Italy, the State Department here in the United States, trying to get justice. But as I kept working with it, I began to realize that it wasn't justice that our family needed. So often that's what people think when they lose somebody like that, that justice is going to help. Well, maybe for some people it does, but I was making one of the justice pieces and her hand was up and what is in her hand? I don't know. It's another one of those cases of taking the position. It's a feather. Who wears a feather? Isis. Isis handles the feather. She takes a feather with which she weighs the souls of the departed. And some of the departed souls are very heavy, and some of the departed souls are very light. And David's soul was very light. And so that took me to that truth issue of it's more important for us, for the family, for the healing of the family, to come up with the truth about David's death and life as well. The blindfold comes from the justice piece that is in the Hall of Justice in Rome. And at that time that David died, I went to Rome with my daughters, Kathleen and Christine. And we were taken to the Hall of Justice to speak to the magistrate. But there in the middle of the rotunda is that great justice that we all know, with her scale and her sword and her blindfold. And I prayed to her to help us get through what we had yet to go through. And so the blindfold keeps on. It's still on. It's still on. And I think that it probably has something to do with our still wondering, still not knowing, but trying to be impartial about it, not trying not to make up our minds about what we think we see.
Yeah, I think it's also reflective of this aspect of trying to keep your ego out of the art, because I think, speaking for myself, I've got a pretty strong personality and I have a lot of opinions about things, but the depth of my art is not about that. It's not really about my personality. It's about my being aware of the collective unconscious and what is the energy that is floating through the air that I'm picking up. I feel like, I don't know who it was that said artists are the antenna of the race. And part of our job is to just be aware of what the energy is that's flowing through the atmosphere.
Yes, yes. That's a little like Joseph Campbell put it, the artists have the job of foretelling what's coming, by picking up on that. Jung took that a little further by saying that my complex, the thing that I'm dealing with, is in the collective unconscious, and the collective wants to express that. It has something to be expressed. And so it floats around looking for somebody who has that complex. And when it finds me, it goes clunk. So there's a magnetic force going on. So when you're in touch with what's there, it's looking for you at the same time. It's what's needed at this time.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. You
My
talked
son
about
Wally just brought me he just brought me this image of that I did after coming back from Rome. It was about all I could do. But here are the archetypes. The archetypes are so helpful to go to. A sculpture of me experiencing my pain isn't going to help me very much, I don't think. But I do think going to the archetypes about it, and I wondered, what was Mary going through? What was she going through? What was this experience that she was having? And our guide in Rome told me something very beautiful. He said, when you go in to look at the Pietà, he asked me what one thing, because I didn't take in anything in Rome except the business at hand. What one thing would you like to see? I said, I would like to see the Pietà. And so he said, when you go in to look at that, please notice that Mary has herself totally focused on Jesus, but she has her hand out and open here, asking why. That's such a beautiful thing to, again, getting into the experience of the image itself. And from being able to use Mary as an example, really helped me to get outside myself and experience it in another way. The same thing with the justice. You know, I could have done images of me pounding the gavel, but going to the archetype was much more meaningful for me, and had the healing quality to it. Doesn't lock me in to where I was feeling. Yeah.
So you mentioned the psychology of the creative process. Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, that's what started it all. I went through one of those terrible, terrible dry spells. Lasted a couple years, got me into therapy. I was so distressed and so depressed, and therapy helped, and I got through it. But 3-4 years later, I wonder what happened, and what can I do that never happens again. And I went off to a National Training Laboratories workshop with the intention of understanding what happened. I want to find out. And in that workshop, it was about a week or 10 days. It was fairly intense. I came up with this understanding that I've been through a process that we, when we're creating, that we make a statement of intention. I'm going to do this. And then we start gathering the things together that we need in order to do what it is that I want to do. And then in the working with that gathering, we are in the mystique. We're in dark places, we're in light places. Some things work, some things don't work. But if we stay with it, then there will be an explosion, coming together, an illumination that happens. Now, these 3 steps that I've just described, we know this is a scientific method, we know it. And when I talked to Frank Marin about it before coming here, but it was why he asked me, I said, I think that there are 2 more stages to this that will empower us to do our creativity. There's 2 more stages in the process, and the 4th one is reflection. Stop and look at what you've done and listen to it, look at it, to reflect about what's happened. I'm such a doer. I finish doing one thing and then I want to start doing the next one. I don't want to take that time to maybe draw the piece, write about the piece, but to reflect on it. And then we have a natural desire to show our work to someone else. It's an alone experience usually, unless you're a musician or an actor, but it's usually an alone experience, and we have a desire to have the poem heard, or to have the sculpture seen, or to have somebody look at the painting. And that's when we start talking about it with somebody else. We sort of move from right brain to left brain. And almost always I hear when somebody is in that last stage, they say, you know, next time I think I'm going to, and that's the statement of intention they just started it all over again. So that's when Frank said, I think you should come here and study. But I have written a book about it. I call it All of a Sudden the Creative Process. And I think you can get a hold of it through me, where I describe this process that we go through as best I've been able to.
That's
Does
great.
it make sense to you, Tim?
Yes, in fact, I would go a little bit farther and I'd say that the art doesn't really happen in the artist, it happens in the viewer. And I think of the stuff that I
Say
do.
that again. The art, say it again, please.
The art doesn't happen in the artist. It happens in the viewer. It happens in the heart of the viewer.
Uh-huh.
And so the things that I create that somebody else would say as art, I think of as just journaling. I'm just spewing forth ideas.
Yeah.
And it's not until I take a piece of art and show it to you that it becomes a work of art, because when it's reflected in the viewer, all of a sudden it comes alive.
All of a sudden. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and so in a way, I feel like I am distanced from my own art unless I can experience it through the eyes of a viewer.
Uh-huh.
So I act as my own viewer. When I'm finished with a work, I do this ritual where I lock myself in a room all alone in the dark with the work of art, with a candle, and I explore it as if I was seeing a cave painting for the first time. And for me, that's the moment of truth, when I can approach the work as the viewer does. But it doesn't really become art. It's still an incestuous process at that point. It doesn't really become art until somebody comes in and they say, oh, look at that. And all of a sudden, bang, it becomes a work of art.
Yeah.
Tim, can I make a comment to that?
Yes,
in fact,
Joss.
Jung said that it's difficult to see the self. One sees the self through others. Thereby, from the reflection, now you can see yourself. So it's in that relationship between people, the artist and the viewer. So I agree. And Coeleen, I just wanted to say, well, I'm not an artist, but I'm a retired psychiatrist, and I just thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. It was very enriching, very clear, and just chock full of wisdom that comes from your deepest part of your total experience, as well as your unconscious. And for you to be sharing it with all of us here today is a true divine gift. And just a little point of that, the thought that came to mind when you mentioned about the maiden with the I guess the archetype of the Lady Liberty, or with the two balance thing, and she's blindfolded. It kind of reminded me of Salome when she was blind. But also that's one thing. But another thought that I came across is, when you're in deep thinking and you're just trying to make a decision, oftentimes people close their eyes and they go deep within to find the answer. So I have a feeling that Lady Justice was doing some pretty deep thinking. But thank you again. There was such a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And, mahalo, that's Hawaiian for thank you for your gift of love. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That Wally just handed me this sculpture that I did of Justice, and I think it was the last one that I did, where she's still blindfolded and she's holding the feather of truth, but she has a clock in her breast. And this is about, it's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time. You have to let time be a factor too. I'm going to read a paragraph from Frank Barron about Carl Jung. Frank says, the importance of Jung, it seems to me, lies not so much in his role in the discovery of the unconscious, but in his affirmation of the self as a reality that we may never come to know, but to which the ego and its projects relate as a ship might to the ocean on which it sails. The ship sails on and on into the vast unknown, the immeasurable self. Wonderful thing for a psychologist who was a scientist. This is his No Rootless Flower. And there are several other books that Frank wrote, but Creators on Creating and Artists in the Making. There's quite a bit that Frank wrote. But that quote that we go on and we don't ever really know. And one of the last things that I heard Frank say before he died, I never really did know myself very well.
Huh. Wow.
Really precious.
Well, on the subject of the blindfold, Jordan says, the blindfold can also serve to cross-check the expectations, to actually allow oneself to inspect expectations so that the mirage and illusions to transcend preconceptions and conjecture with what is actually present, the rhizomatic fabric of the multiple interdependent scales, each a version of the other. And then adds, yes, the old mantra of close the two eyes to open the third.
Oh, I like that. Yes. Well, maybe that's, the things in their own time that we're all talking about this now. Your experience of going into a dark room with your work and lighting a candle, me being blindfolded, all of our reflection on it is what the pandemic is making us do.
Tim, may I have your permission to share with Coeleen your Returning the Nails piece?
Sure.
Okay. I have it here on my screen, so I'll share the screen. So, Coeleen, this is a piece that Tim sent me a postcard of a few months back. And he explained to me on the back of the postcard what it means. And when I saw this image and this description, it just decapitated me. It was I got it in the mail on a, now tearing my office apart because I had to tape it. Sorry. I have the postcard here, so I'll just read the postcard to you.
Please do.
It was it reminds me of you with your battle with justice, and when I saw this postcard and what Tim said to me, it just decapitated me. I couldn't move for an hour. I had so many connections with this, and I don't think I've recovered yet, but anyway, he says, Dear Skip, it's said that after the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Chinese government sent bills to the families of protesters for the cost of their executions. Whether true or not, this is the cast of human evil. I'm researching early metallurgy and discovered that in Christ's time, iron was a strategic material. I imagine if nails were used for crucifixions, the families of the victims would be charged with returning the nails to the government. This image is Mary post-crucifixion. And so the spiritual point of this is that whatever can happen to one in the physical world, the spiritual will carry the future
Yes.
with
Yeah.
it. And so she's
Beautiful. I'm gonna,
returning the nails because, you know, my son will
yeah.
be around long after the Pharisees and the Caesars. Very powerful image also,
Yeah.
but
Yes, at some point, beautiful, beautiful sculpture, Tim. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Can you say what moved you to do that sculpture?
Well, I was contacted by the Chinese dissident students after the Tiananmen Square massacre to do a piece to commemorate what they had gone through. And I've done several projects like this, like with Archbishop Tutu in South Africa, being kind of thrust into these horrific human experiences that are far removed from this very kind of suburban, you know, safe life that most of us Americans are familiar with, where the
Yes.
you know, we all suffer from personal tragedies, but it's not very often that we are thrust into a war or are part of a massacre like this. And I really had to go into the depths of my empathy to discover what that horror is about, both in terms of its violent aspect and also in terms of the victimized aspect of it.
Yeah.
And I've actually done two sculptures of that particular pose. And my hope is one day to be able to do a third one. The first was called Conviction and is very accusatory. The second one that Skip just showed is called Endurance, which is about the strength of Mary. And I want to do another one someday called Forgiveness.
Oh. So it's waiting for you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's waiting for you.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a beautiful piece.
Thank you.
Beautiful piece. Thank you. Thank you, really. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
You know, that's an example of how the collective unconscious, the mystique, needs us to do this. We need to feed that mystique, you know, because otherwise anything can come out. You know, we have to do it, and we have to make ourselves whole. You know what, Skip? When you were talking about how the
well,
oh, we lost her.
I think we lost Coeleen for a minute here. She probably will come back.
Meanwhile, if anybody else has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or just raise your hand or something. We're probably going to close up here before too long.
We have quite a gang here. We've had 88 people between Zoom and YouTube at any given time through the evening. So it's.
Are you monitoring the YouTube to see if we have questions there?
Yes, I have. I think we've covered all the questions that were on YouTube. Let me see if I can just call her. Because I do have her number right here.
I wondered if I could make a comment too about the experience of going into a dark room with the finished sculpture. That seems like an artificial way of returning to the unconscious. And then when the sculpture is shown to somebody, it becomes like a reflection of the person's soul.
Yeah, that sounds right. Actually, the source of that ritual for me was Rodin, because he said that he could feel variations in a sculpture that he could not see with his eyes. And he would sometimes use a candle to try to delineate changes in the form that were not apparent visually. And so I started doing that, and I realized that it was a really, really important ritual for me, particularly at the end when I'm at the point of I'm about to share a piece with the world. Having that ritual, that time alone with the work, which has a kind of character of its own, allows me to not only kind of check the accuracy of what I think I've produced, but also to have that moment of reflection, to be able to see the work as a viewer rather than as a creator. So, Jessica, I appreciate that comment. Another comment from Terry McNichol is that Jung was delighted when the Vatican acknowledged in 1950 that Mary was assumed into heaven, body and soul, that the whole feminine was in heaven. And actually, he talked about that quite a bit, that's one of the most important aspects of the development of the human psyche, Mary's assumption into heaven. As an artist, I'm thinking a lot about the development of the human psyche. I just shared a sculpture last week of what I've created during this pandemic. And I really think because this is a problem that is shared with the whole world, and it's also a kind of an unusual problem in that it forces us to realize that we are dependent, we are interdependent. We are not individual creatures. And here, especially in America, you know, there's this this idea that with rugged individualism, and especially with wealth and power, you can make yourself independent. And I think that's exactly the wrong attitude. We need to become more dependent on each other to be able to acknowledge that we are always social creatures. And the pandemic kind of gives us this gift of being able to force us to realize that we are only as healthy as the people around us. So I'm hoping that we learn that lesson, and not just to, you know, sequester ourselves in some luxury resort on the coast of Thailand or something.
Meanwhile, I did speak with Coeleen. They lost power briefly in Santa Cruz, but she's coming back. And
Okay. Hi.
there she is.
Hi.
Can you ask him to let me in? No, there's
I wanted to ask everybody to do something when we're wondering what we can do. Jung not only gave us some wonderful, wonderful teachings, but he also did the Red Book, and he did it. And he did it from a place where he did not know much about drawing and painting. He did not consider himself an artist, although he seriously considered becoming an artist. But he did the Red Book, and he had it up in his office, working on it. When his patients came, they saw what he was doing. He shared it with them, and he urged them to also paint, to tell their stories that way. So I wanted to urge everybody to start doodling, start making your mark, to just 15 minutes. It's like writing pages in the morning, which you can do also. But if you start doodling, those lines will begin to take some shapes. Now, if you doodle every morning for 15 minutes between now and the election, see what happens to your doodles over that time. And whatever happens, see what happens to your doodles at the time of the election and at the time of the outcome. And Skip, I hope that maybe we can look at some of those at some time in the future.
Yeah, that would be great. Actually, I've been doing a tarot reading almost every day.
Yes.
For the president. I've been doing a tarot reading for the president every day, in terms of where he is each day. And
very good.
So that is my kind of doodle, actually, obviously. Because
well, Jung urged us to do this, to engage with our unconscious so that we can become more whole. Right. We have to do it. This is the personal work that's asked for now.
Right. Coeleen, this has been such a special event here. My wife didn't come in, and I wanted her to hear this, and I got so entranced with it that I couldn't even shout at her, even though I had myself on mute. But I will make sure that she watches it because it's so special. Okay. And you know, what I wanted to also re-emphasize is that creativity is the way we communicate with our soul, and this has come through very clearly to me. And actually, the building behind me in my virtual reality here is the building that Dr. Jung built at Bollingen, which was his testimony of what he meant. So he put it in stone. He wanted to put it in stone, and he certainly did. But you know, I always encourage people to go to any store of your choice, an art store, a craft store, Sears department, Sears tool department, cooking store, a shoe store where they have ballet slippers, whatever is interesting to you, and whatever speaks to you in that store, pick it up and start working with it. And you know, it will either move you on in that art form, or it will say it's not for you. But you need to find something. And I make an omelet every day for my wife, and it's a new omelet every day because I'm not a very rules oriented guy. So I use the same ingredients, but it's different every day. But it connects me up with my soul every day. So that's specifically a practice that I do for my creativity.
We really need to get to know ourselves more fully, more wholly, you know, so that we're more in tune with what's going on and not so stunned and surprised when these things happen.
Yeah, assuredly. Yeah. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And is there anything else that anyone else would like to say before we wrap up? I can put this back on gallery view so we can see you all. There, at one point there were 88 people online with us.
Wonderful.
And and plus with YouTube, if we've had 12 watching all through the event, then it probably means we've had a couple of hundred people watch parts of it. So it's just a terrific way to get this information out to people. I really, really, really appreciate it. And okay, go ahead, Tim.
What showed up in the chat was the link to workshops on the YouTube channel that's on her son's page. So if you want to look on that, you can see that that link.
Right, and I put those links onto the YouTube chat, so they will be visible in the replay. And also, I'm going to put the link for future events, which is a MailChimp link. Which, if you haven't signed up with us and you'd like to hear some of our other events, that we've had some quite profound ones recently, please go to that link and sign up. And so, Coeleen, thank you so much for being here. I'll call this to a halt at this point, and thank you all for being here. It's been terrific. Peace.
Yes, thanks everybody. Great questions, and come back. We'll do another.
Thank you.
Thank you.